I'm going to show you. You can find those man-made features that are on your map that you need, whether we're talking about trying to plan a primary or alternate route, whether we're talking about an evacuation scenario, an SHTF scenario. You know, you need to bug out, you need to find routes and opportunities for you to be able to utilize if you have to travel on foot or if you're doing a mounted or convoy operation, right? What are the resources that are out there that you need to be able to find? The same way that we do when we're out running through the woods. Hey team, welcome to the channel, man. I'm stoked to see you. So I wanted to do something a little bit different. That was to take a city map. This isn't one, happens to be a Thurston County map. It's my local area map. And I want to walk you through some of the things that I'm looking at when I look at a city street map or road map, because I think that there's things that we take for granted. You know, the same thing I see when dudes start walking through the wilderness and they don't know how to read a topographical map. I think the same thing is true of a regular city map as well. There's some hidden clues and some hidden gems in here that if we just take a few minutes, a few moments to understand what the cartographers are trying to tell us, it can make us that much more efficient at moving around in an urban environment. Hey, if you want to master your craft and develop your tactical virtue, make sure you subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell so that you can stay up to date on some future content. What is a map? Right, so a map is a two-dimensional drawing of a portion of the Earth's surface drawn to scale as seen from above. And I don't care if we're looking at, a city map like this, or if we're looking at a map that's produced by the USGS, the same type that we use in the military. All cartographers are going through the same types of process. They're trying to draw things to scale, and the things that they're trying to draw are really just two basic things: natural features and man-made features. And so we use colors and symbols to help represent these things. And so this one, of course, is an Olympia, Lacey, Tumwater, Thurston County. This one's made by G.M. Johnson. It ran $6.95. I picked it up at Walmart. So it is these types of maps are readily available to anybody who's out there. If you got a big box store, you can probably go get yourself a city map, or even just a circle, a gas station. A lot of times will have these maps printed on decent sized paper, but the paper is not waterproof, so you would want to be cautious with getting this thing wet. In addition, there are life-saving resources that are on these maps, but we just need to know how and where to look for. But we don't spend enough time talking about how to read these types of maps and how to do this type of planning that we're going to introduce to you here in this video. And we're going to continue this on throughout the series of urban operations and make sure that we cover all of our bases so that we can stay prepared. Because as we've seen in recent cities, whether it's shutdowns up in Seattle, current shutdown going on in Portland, rioting all over this country, scenarios can present themselves, and you need alternate means and methods of getting home. And that means ultimately that your GPS, although it will reroute you as you go, you need to know what you're getting yourself into before you start going, because it may not be taking you in the direction that you want to go. All right, let's take a look at this map and we'll start getting going. What I'm going to use, a pen, a pencil, some markers, and some highlighters. And we're going to go through, we're going to look at all kinds of things from the resources that are out there in my area right now, how to plan primary and alternate routes, how to recognize and mark down areas that we want to stay away from. How can we mark down some green zone areas and some different phase lines as we're thinking about all of our routes and how to get to all the resources and the stores that we need to get to, the work and everything else, right? So let's get to this. Right, so the first thing that we'll do is we'll just open this bad boy up and look at the legend. So the legend, of course, on any map, whether it's a military topographical map or a city map, is going to tell us all the things that we should be able to expect to find in this area. So the good thing is we have a scale. We have a direction of north, which on most maps is going to be towards the top of the map. We don't have a declination. That's because they're not expecting us to do dismounted land navigation. We have all our symbols for our roads and our railroads and the county lines and how different highways and routes are labeled, as well as one-way streets, schools, different points of interest, hospitals, fire stations, all the way down the line, up to and even including military reservations. So of course, JB land will be shaded in gray. And again, we can see this was copyrighted in 2019. So it's going to be up to date as of 2019. So I'm going to continue to open this up, and you'll see we also have a listing of every street, and this is one of the common things about road maps, is you're going to have a catalog of all the streets on the map and then where to find them, and that's what the grid reference system on these maps are for. All right, and so here is the main portion of the area that we're going to be looking at, and it starts all the way over here in Olympia, has Lacey off to the east a little bit. It's actually kind of to the northeast a little bit, and of course we got Tumwater and a bunch of unincorporated areas as well throughout the county. We can see right off the bat we have a lot of colors going on that we saw in the legend. But we also have colors being used to denote different parts of the area. For example, in this case, Lacey is highlighted in yellow. Thurston County areas, unincorporated city areas, are in green, and Olympia is in white, right? And so the next thing that we'll do is we're going to take a pack of highlighters. I'm going to start off using blue. And what I want to try to do here is highlight every area on my map that has a good resource, a positive resource. So I'm thinking about things like hospitals, schools, fire stations. There's all the things that speak out to me that says, this is probably an area that if I needed to, I can find a resource. So what am I going to find at a school? So we'll set that off. So we've already knocked out hospitals, which is kind of obvious for medical attention. Schools, the reason I want to highlight schools is A, is low traffic. B, communities are going to use them for community outreach programs should the circumstance arrive, because everybody knows where these schools are, at least those who have had kids in school. We know where these schools are at. And so it's a great place because you have stadiums, you have classrooms. So in the case of a natural disaster, for example, there's a lot of room and opportunity to be able to assist the local community through the infrastructure of our local schools. And it has water. And I know that if I needed water and I was maybe on foot and I was walking around and I didn't want to stop at a gas station, I could always just come up to school and get water. And on that note, listen to me, friends, don't trespass. And of course, fire stations as well, right? Not only how close are the local fire houses to me that I want to be able to be aware of so I can understand what their response time may be, but also to know that I can also go there in the event of an emergency as well. Also, if I need some water. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a few minutes and I'm just going to start highlighting all of these areas in blue. And when I have it done, we'll come right back. Right now we can start to see some of these areas really popping. And if you think about it, in some of these areas, like maybe fire stations and the police department, which by the way is not marked on the map, but it's right there for Lacey, have a little bit of a green zone themselves, and we'll look at some other green zone areas as it relates, and some hot spots as well as what we're going to look at next. But if you get inside this the radius of some of these areas, it's a safe bet that you should be able to get to the actual destination itself. So as I did just kind of allude to, we will look at some red zones here now. Now I know that there is a red zone right here. I stay away from that area as much as I can. It's a camp, if you will. The other obvious hotspot is Olympia itself. So I can probably come in and make a pretty decent, border here. A police station happens to be right in the middle of this danger zone here. And I have another green zone in the red zone, and we'll talk about that here in just a second. Local church, my church actually. The two big, larger danger areas I want to note that we want to try to stay away from. Now I want to start thinking about, now that we can kind of look and see some of the green zones, if you will, some of the red zones, and we can start to see some of the resources out here. I want to think about how somebody may or may not get to work. So let's look at some routes. So for this one, I'm going to use, we'll talk about primary and alternate routes, but first we need to think about most likely routes. And we'll assume that somebody lives maybe up here in the South Bay area, in Thurston County, and maybe they work off over this direction, whether it's towards Tacoma or anything else. So obviously, and unfortunately, I-5 is a requirement. There are some other ways around it, but you literally have to spend 2 or 3 times as long. So assuming that somebody lived up here, we know that we could use, as ease of access, Sleater-Kinney. We could use Hawks Prairie. We could come down here to Carpenter. If we come this way, you have to come this way. Marvin. And if you lived off over in this direction, you could also, come this way off of Lily. And you wouldn't want to use South Bay Road itself, because that's going to take you closer into the red zone. You'd want to try to use one of these other routes to get to I-5 to start moving east and north, right? So on that note, let's look at a couple other interesting areas because maybe we do need to go get some resources and we're on foot. We could use any of the highlighted zones in yellow, but we can also use this trail system here. And on that note too, there's a rail line. Puts you a lot further away from some resources, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Being away from resources also means that you're away from people. Of course, this particular trail system is super long and just keeps coming down. Right? So primary and alternate routes that we want to think about. A couple things that take into consideration. One is the route that you go to work in is not the same route that you return back from. So for example, if I was departing from this fire station and I needed to get onto I-5, my primary route may be to come up here and use South Bay to Hawks Prairie, over to Marvin, and then down onto 5, and I could go to work. Coming home, I could take 5 and use Martin as my primary means all the way down here to Lily and then come up. Now what that's going to do is no matter where we're looking at, there's going to be some areas that are going to be unavoidable. You can't avoid the areas that we're talking about. So in this case, it might be, with those two routes themselves, I'm going to pass this intersection every single time. It's my junction. And from here on 5, right, I'm going to hit this area here every single time, as well as the rest of I-5. But the closer to the fire station that we get, right, if I have a route that leaves this way but comes back home this way, then I'm kind of alleviating a lot of the stress and the risk associated with this location itself. Conversely, I really want 2 primary routes and 2 alternate routes, if that makes sense. So my primary route A may be to come South Bay to Hawks Prairie, as we discussed. Primary route B could be South Bay to Sleater Kinney, and then come straight down and then hop over and get on I-5. Coming back home, my primary route could be 5 here to Carpenter Road to Hawks Prairie, and my alternate could be using Martin, which would take a little bit longer of a route. There are some other out of the way area routes that we could be looking at. Right. So, you know, if somebody suspected something that might be off a little bit, you could end up using some different routes and getting around. And although, I mean, it's good to get out and about in the cities and in your local urban areas and rural areas and know how the road system works. I can't stress that enough. Know how your road system works. Are your roads primarily running north and south, east and west? Are they moving in an extremely well-organized grid pattern that obviously just makes sense? That the city planners years ago, decades ago, centuries ago, whatever the case might be, was really putting in some forethought. You're probably going to notice, you know, as you move around, that you're going to find some similarities with how the areas are put together and what some of the local danger areas that you have, as well as some of the resources, again, that you have, because it's not all about mitigating risk. It's about knowing how to get to the resources that you need safely and effectively should there be any kind of a shutdown. So, for example, the city of Olympia, every weekend, pretty much for the past couple months, has been really since a state of hostility. We've had a lot of protests. Some of them have been active, dangerous, people getting shot, large, you know, fist brawling fights, dudes swinging bats and flags of all things at each other. I started up here at the Capitol and then moved into the downtown area. Although I got a nice hot spot over in here, you know, I'm going to call that zone right there a little green zone. And then I have a little green zone. So I need to know how I can best get to some of these places and still avoid the hot spot. So as we're kind of thinking, you know, of the zones that we have around us, we can kind of start thinking about what our boundaries are, right? What our protection areas are, what areas we need to think about, you know, as far as perimeter security almost, if you will. It's kind of a militaristic way of looking and approaching this. But I do think that it serves some benefit and some advantage. But as it relates to, you know, to getting back up here to this fire station, I think we can almost think that just from knowing some of these areas, by the way, you know, there's another red zone right here as well. And a lot of encampments here. Certainly the further away you get from your zone, from your area, the less safe that it becomes, because you can't control everything around you outside of a certain area, right? You just don't have, you know, that max effective range of what it is that you have may just be, you know, your little zone that's right there around your fire station or whatever. By the way, I mean, I don't live by this fire station, but it is a nice area. But we do need to think about that, right? What's the maximum effective range of our protection, of our communication? How well do we know our neighbors? You know, there's might surprise you because there's not a lot of streets here, but there is a lot of people who live up in this area. So how many people do I know that I've visited, that I have relationships with? Who are my local welders? Who's my retired military guys? Who are my ham operators? By the way, speaking of that note, if we come down here, super important area right in here. And a lot of repeaters standing there. You know, who are the other dudes around here who have repeaters set up, right? Because they're obviously ham operators. If I see an antenna that's 30 feet up in the air, right? So go make a relationship with these guys, because they have some skill sets and you have some skill sets, and just be neighborly. Like, I know that there's some fabricators and some welding shops, because I've just been out here driving around and I see them. So what kind of service do they have to offer? Man, you don't have to be in the business of just being self-centric and being narcissistic. Just go be neighborly and bring some conversation to the table, and start to get to know your immediate circle, and then start to enlarge your sphere of influence, right? And pretty soon, that max effective range is pretty big. All because you went and knocked on the door and said, hey, you know, my name's Bill. Let's talk about some stuff, or whatever the case is, right? Everybody, I think that's just about going to do it for the day. If you enjoyed the content of the video, make sure you smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell so you can stay up to date on some future content. And as always, until then, you stay stoked.